Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I still remember very clearly the first day I met Emily, a heavily rainy afternoon, where the sound of rain falling steadily like a ghostly song. I sat in a small coffee shop at the end of the street, listening to the rain sounds coming from the glass door, trying to find a little peace after a long day of stressful work. And then she walked in. Her long black hair was soaked, her eyes were deep, her skin was pale as if she had never known sunlight. But what I could never forget was not her strange beauty, but the terrible truth I accidentally realized. Under the yellow light of the shop, her shoes were wet and stained on the floor, but there was no shadow. I thought my eyes were blurred. I tried to rub my eyes and look again, but the image was still the same. Emily smiled, a smile that made me both shiver and curious. I heard myself, for some reason, inviting her to sit at the same table. From that moment on, my life took a different turn, a path leading into darkness that I didn't know about. She spoke very little, her voice low and cold, like the wind blowing through the pine forest on a lonely camping night. Our conversation began with small fragments, a few questions, a longer than usual look, and an obsession that gradually invaded my mind. I didn't expect that, at that moment, I had stepped into a vivid creepypasta world, where every little detail could become the seed of a nightmare. In the following days, Emily and I met more often. Every time she appeared, she still kept the same mysterious, incomprehensible beauty, a beauty that made me both fascinated and uneasy. I told her about my childhood, about the nights home alone, in my parents' old house, where the darkness often turned everything into a monster. Emily listened, her eyes shining with an indescribable light, as if she had lived with that fear for a long time. I asked her about her family, about her past, but she just smiled and changed the subject. One evening, I walked Emily home after a walk in the rain. As we passed the streetlights, my heart ached again. My shadow stretched out on the wet cement floor, trembling with each step, and beside me, there was only emptiness. Emily had no shadow. I quickly turned away, pretending not to see, but fear had taken root deep in my mind. I told myself that it could just be the light, just the illusion of someone immersed in love. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. We were officially married after only 6 months of knowing each other. A decision that, looking back, I now realize was foolish. The wedding was small, in an old house near the suburbs. When the music started, I suddenly realized that I was the only one trembling in the room, while Emily stood there, cold and perfect. Friends came to attend. Many of them later whispered that they felt something haunted there, a feeling of being watched by invisible eyes. I brushed it all off, because at that time, I was too in love with Emily to listen to any warnings. On the wedding night, the rain pattered on the roof again. I lay next to Emily, listening to the rain sounds like a deathly lullaby. When I fell asleep, I dreamed that I woke up in another room, a dark room without light, where only the sound of footsteps was approaching me. I looked around in panic and realized that the walls were full of Emily's photos, all without shadows. I woke up with a start, cold sweat running down my forehead, and when I turned to look, she was still lying there, her face calm as if nothing had happened. During the days living with Emily, I began to realize that the house we lived in was gradually changing. The mirrors in the house often cracked inexplicably, reflecting distorted images of us. I no longer dare to look for long, because in the mirror, I once saw Emily smiling, while in real life, she was completely motionless. At night, the house echoed, with strange sounds, slow footsteps stretching through the hallway, a gentle knock on the door when we were both home, alone. I asked Emily. She only responded with silence, sometimes a deep look that made my spine shiver. Gradually, I could no longer distinguish between reality and dream. Every time it rained, every time the sound of rain fell, I found myself pulled into a strange memory, where Emily stood in the middle of the rain without a shadow, her deep black eyes staring at me. I began to fear my own house, fear the bedroom, where I once sought peace. I felt like I was lost in a haunted forest, where the light never shone. And then, one night, when I returned home late, I witnessed a scene that I could no longer deny. In the dimly lit living room, Emily stood there, facing the large mirror. She had no shadow, and in the mirror, her image danced, twisted, smiled eerily. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and then Emily turned her head toward me, her lips moving. Something I couldn't hear. I knew everything had just begun, and the real horror was still waiting for me ahead. Asterisk. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what happens as I start investigating the true past of this shadowless woman. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk. Ever since the night I saw Emily in front of the mirror, my mind has never been at peace again. Every time I enter the living room, I feel like someone is watching my every move. The light in the house never seems bright enough. The light bulbs often flicker, giving off a sickly yellow light. I began to doubt whether this house really belongs to me or has been occupied by some haunted force since Emily set foot in. Every night, I hear strange noises echoing in the dark hallway. Heavy footsteps that drag on as if someone is deliberately wandering around in the middle of the night. When I open the door to check, the hallway is completely empty. Only the sound of rain tapping on the roof remains. The rain sounds echo everywhere like a funeral song. Emily still maintains a calm appearance. She rarely talks, just sits by the window looking out at the night sky, her eyes motionless, her face cold. I tried to ask her many times why there was no shadow, why the mirror often reflected distorted images, but Emily just shook her head, smiling slightly, a smile that sent a chill down my spine. I began to search for documents, read creepypasta stories online, ghost stories about people without shadows, living entities hiding in human form. The more I read, the more similar my situation seemed to me, and the more my fear grew. One evening, I returned home late. In the silent house, I clearly heard a light, steady knock on the door, like the heartbeat of a dying person. I walked out into the hallway and stood still. At the end of the hallway, right in front of the window, a figure passed by. My heart was pounding. I rushed towards it, but when I got there was only cold emptiness. Emily was standing right behind me. I turned around in surprise and saw her staring at me without blinking. On the floor where she stood, there was no shadow. I choked, wanting to scream, but my throat was tight. The next morning, I found an excuse to leave the house. I drove to my parents' old house in the suburbs, where I had spent those haunting years of home alone. In my memory, that house was cold, but at least it was more familiar to me than the place where I was living with Emily. I sat in the old room, opening my childhood diaries. The yellowed pages reminded me that, since I was little, I had seen strange things. Shadows that didn't match their real shapes, whispers in the night, and even dreams of a woman standing in the rain without a shadow. At that time, I thought I was just haunted by being home alone too much. Now, I realized that maybe fate had been attached to me for a long time, and Emily was the embodiment of that darkness. That night, I didn't dare to go back. I slept in the old house, but the nightmare still haunted me. In my dream, I was camping in the deep forest. The campfire was dying down. Darkness surrounded me. In the middle of the night, footsteps echoed around the tent. The sound of dry leaves rustling, the sound of branches breaking. I held a flashlight and looked outside, and saw Emily standing a few meters away. Her white shirt wet with rain, her hair hanging down, her black eyes looking at me. I looked down at the ground. Her feet were empty, completely shadowless. I screamed, trying to run away, but my legs felt like they were tied. When I woke up, sweat soaked my back, and I realized that someone's footsteps were also heard in the hallway in the old room. I didn't dare open the door. I decided to go to the town library, hoping to find some clues. There, I discovered old records about a village that had disappeared hundreds of years ago. According to legend, the village was cursed by a woman without a shadow, an entity that was said to walk between two worlds. Those who see or marry her will gradually have their life sucked out, their souls trapped in the mirror, forever unable to escape. Reading this far, my hands trembled, my heart pounded. I could no longer deny it. Emily was the embodiment of that curse. When I returned, Emily was sitting on the living room chair, her eyes looking straight at me. She asked me where I had gone, her voice flat but filled with invisible threats. I tried to hide my trembling, replying that I had just been walking around. She didn't say anything more, just smiled slightly, then turned to look at the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. In that moment, I saw in the mirror not only Emily, but also countless other faces, pale, distorted, screaming silently. I realized that they were trapped souls. I knew that if I didn't escape, I would soon become one of them. I had to find a way to escape Emily, escape this haunted house before it was too late. But how? She was always there beside me, like a deadly shadow that never left. I started to make a plan, and from that moment, the real battle between me and the thing that was in the form of that woman officially began. Stay tuned for the next episode to see what I try to do to escape from Emily's cold hands. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I began to feel that I was no longer in control of my daily life. Since discovering the distorted faces in the mirror, I no longer dared to look at any mirror in the house. I covered them with a cloth, but only a few hours later, when I returned, I found them removed, as if someone deliberately wanted me to look straight at the truth. Emily seemed to know that I was scared, but she did not hide anything, even seemed to enjoy my trembling. I began to believe that she wanted me to go crazy, so that one day, my soul would also be trapped in that broken mirror. At night, the house was silent, but strange sounds echoed. The footsteps never stopped, sometimes far, sometimes near, sometimes right behind the bedroom door. I opened the door with a start. There was no one, but the feeling of being watched never disappeared. I turned on the television, trying to fill the void with sound, but the screen was blurry. showing the silhouette of a woman sitting motionless. My heart pounded, and I turned it off. But for a split second, I was sure I saw Emily, even though she was sleeping right next to me. I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, I pretended to go out to work. I went to see a shaman an old friend had mentioned. He lived in a small wooden house on the edge of the forest, in a cold space where only the wind and the sound of dry leaves could be heard. I told him the whole story, from the first time I met Emily to the terrifying signs of her not having a shadow. The old man listened, his face growing more and more wrinkled. Finally, he told me that I was married to an entity that did not belong to this world, someone who had come out of an ancient curse. He told me to never let myself be touched by her when I stood in front of a mirror, because that was when my soul would be pulled away forever. I shivered, a feeling of despair gradually tightening my throat. I asked him how to escape this situation. The old man looked out the window, his eyes distant, and then said only that the only way was to find the source of the curse, the village that had disappeared long ago. There might be answers, or it might be the end. I left the wooden house with a heavy heart. As I walked out into the forest, I heard the sound of branches breaking, footsteps following me. I turned around, saw no one, but felt like I was being hunted. I hurriedly got into the car, leaving behind the eerie, howling wind like a devil's song. That night, I came home late. Emily was waiting in the living room, the yellow light reflecting on her pale face. She asked me where I had gone, her voice low and cold. I stammered that I was just going to work. She smiled, then walked closer to me, her eyes staring straight at me, making me suffocate. As she passed by the large mirror hanging in the hallway, I couldn't help but glance. In the mirror, I saw dozens of bony arms reaching out from the darkness, trying to grab Emily, but they passed through as if they didn't exist. My heart ached. I stepped back, and when I looked down at the floor, of course, under her feet was still empty. I began to plan to leave the house. I packed up some necessary things, but was always in a state of fear that Emily would find out. I hid some things in the trunk of the car, planning to wait for the right opportunity to leave. However, things weren't that simple. The haunted house seemed to have become a giant cage. Every time I tried to leave, something strange happened. Sometimes the main door wouldn't open. The lock seemed to be held tightly by someone. Sometimes the car wouldn't start, even though it had been working normally before. There were nights when I heard a whisper in my ear while I was sleeping, a voice repeating the two words "Home Alone" over and over again, like a curse that I would be stuck with that entity in this house forever. One time, I mustered up the courage to run away in the middle of the night. I opened the door and rushed out into the pouring rain. The rain sounds echoed everywhere, cold and wet. I ran to the car, but when I opened the door, I stopped. In the rearview mirror, I saw Emily already sitting in the back seat, a devilish smile spread across her face. I panicked and backed away, falling to the wet ground. When I looked up, I saw no one in the car. I trembled, not daring to take another step, only knowing to drag myself back to the house, my heart heavy as if it was about to burst. I gradually felt Emily's presence spread everywhere. Even when she was not near, I still felt her deep black eyes following me. When the lights were off, when the night fell, when the wind whistled through the cracks in the door, I saw the image of a woman standing motionless, without a shadow, looking at me in silence. I knew I didn't have much time left. My life was slowly draining away, and then one evening, when I was about to step down the stairs, I heard a soft call from downstairs. The call sounded exactly like my voice, repeating my name over and over in the empty house. I stopped, cold sweat running down my face. I knew that if I stepped down, I would never be the same again. Stay tuned for the next episode to see how I faced that strange call in this haunted house. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the call from downstairs made my whole body freeze. That voice was mine, the same tone, each word echoed in the damp space, lingering like an echo from the bottom of a well. I stood still on the stairs, my hands tightly gripping the cold railing. The house was dark, only the dim light from the flickering hallway lamp left, casting distorted streaks of light on the wall. I took a deep breath, mustering up all my courage to walk down each step, my steps heavy as if being pulled into the abyss. The further I went down, the clearer the call became. But the most terrifying thing was that it did not come from a fixed direction, but seemed to surround me, seeping into my ears, flowing straight into my mind. When I reached the ground floor, I turned on the light, but the bulb went out immediately, leaving the whole room in pitch darkness. I reached for the lighter in my pocket. The small light flashed, and right in front of me, in the corner of the living room, there was a huddled figure. I shined the light in that direction. My heart stopped when I realized that the face was exactly like mine, except for one thing. There was no shadow under my feet. That face looked up. Its eyes were white. Its mouth moved as it called my name. I dropped the lighter. The darkness immediately swallowed everything. In that moment, a cold hand gently touched my shoulder. I turned around. There was no one. I hurriedly ran up to my room, slammed the door, and gasped like someone about to drown. Emily sat on the bed, her eyes calmly looking at me. She didn't ask, didn't speak, just smiled. That smile lasted too long, making me shiver. I turned away, lay down on the bed, but couldn't sleep. In my fitful dream, I found myself locked in a mirror room, surrounded by distorted images of me, of Emily, and of countless strange faces screaming in silence. I tried to break the door, but everything was closed. Only the sound of rain hitting the roof. The rain sounds echoed like a countdown to death. The next day, I tried to leave the house, but Emily was always by my side. Every step I took was monitored. I began to think that I needed to leave her at least once, far away, to find a chance to investigate that ancient village that had been wiped out. In the afternoon, I pretended to say that I wanted to go out to buy some things. Emily nodded, but her eyes still followed me all the way to the door. When I drove out of the neighborhood, I breathed a sigh of relief. I decided to go to the northern mountains, the place mentioned in the old notes in the library. The road leading there was winding, surrounded by ancient trees. The cold air made me shiver. I brought a tent and some food, pretending to be a simple camping trip. But in fact, I was looking for the truth. At night, I set up my tent in the middle of the forest, surrounded by only the whistling wind and the sound of insects. I lit a fire, the flickering flame illuminating the long shadows of the trees. But for some reason, my shadow trembled as if it did not fit my body. I remembered Emily, remembered that shadowless face, and suddenly felt as if there were eyes staring at me from the endless darkness in the middle of the night. When the fire was almost out, I was startled by the sound of footsteps around the tent. At first, I thought it was a wild animal, but the more I listened, the more I realized it was the sound of shoes, heavy, deliberately stepping on dry leaves. I shakily held the flashlight and shined it outside. In the darkness, a figure stood still. I turned the light towards it, and my heart clenched. It was Emily, her white dress soaked, her hair hanging down, her deep black eyes staring at me. I looked down at the ground. There was no shadow. I screamed, quickly turned back into the tent, and pulled the zipper tight. But only a few seconds later, I heard the sound of the tent fabric being torn, each fingernail piercing through the space. I threw everything away, rushed out of the tent, and ran for my life into the forest. The rain began to pour, the rain sounds, mingling with the pounding of my heart. I ran and ran, my feet slipping on the wet ground, until I stopped and realized I was deep in the forest. There was no fire, no way back. All around was darkness and the howling wind. I leaned against the tree, panting, trying to reassure myself that it was all an illusion, that Emily couldn't have followed me here. But then, from afar, I saw a dim light shining in the middle of the forest. I followed it, each step trembling. I got closer. I discovered an old, dilapidated wooden house. The wooden door was ajar. The wind blowing through it made a groaning sound. I pushed the door open and entered. Inside, it was covered in dust, a strong smell of mold. The walls were covered with old paintings, all depicting a woman in a white dress without a shadow. I realized this was the only remaining house of the cursed village. My heart pounded wildly. I approached the largest painting. The woman in the painting's eyes suddenly turned, looking straight at me. I screamed, retreating, but behind me I heard the sound of a door slamming. I knew I had entered the lair of nightmares, and what awaited me would be more terrifying than anything I had ever experienced. Stay tuned for the next episode to find out what happened in that cursed old house. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the wooden door slammed shut behind me, startling me. The echo echoed throughout the rotten house, like the sound of a coffin closing. I stood still in the darkness, the light shining through the cracks in the wooden walls, illuminating the layers of dust floating in. The suffocating, musty smell made it hard for me to breathe. I looked around. Dozens of paintings hung on all four walls, all depicting the same woman in a white dress, her face pale but her eyes sunken. What made me shiver was that on each painting, the ground beneath her feet was empty, with absolutely no shadow. I moved closer, noticing the scribbles as if drawn in a panic. The brush strokes shaky, the colors smudged, but the fear was clearly present in every detail. I reached out to touch a painting. The dust peeled off, revealing the scribbled words. Underneath, I read each word slowly, my voice trembling. The one who comes later will replace the one who comes first. The one who sees the truth will not escape. I pulled my hand back, my heart pounding as if it were about to explode. I understood that there were people who had lived in this house, who had painted these pictures, and they all knew the terrible truth about the woman without a shadow. Perhaps they had disappeared, leaving only these haunting traces. A creaking sound echoed from the attic. I startled and looked up, my feet stopping, not daring to move. But then, as if urged by an invisible force, I slowly walked towards the stairs. With each step, the wooden planks creaked, as if they were crying. When I reached the top, I saw a narrow hallway leading to a final room. The door was ajar, a faint light coming from inside. I reached out and pushed the door open. The room was full of mirrors, big and small, hanging all over the walls. They reflected my image from every angle. But the scary thing was that in some of the mirrors, I no longer saw myself, but instead Emily. Her face pale, her smile endless. I backed away, bumping into a mirror behind me. The mirror shook, the glass like rippling water. I was horrified to see in it countless bony arms reaching out, beckoning, trying to pull me in. I screamed, rushed out of the room, ran down the stairs, my heart pounding. But when I reached the ground floor, I stopped. On the rotten wooden table, an old notebook lay there, as if waiting for me. I opened it with trembling hands. The yellowed pages were filled with words. The content told of a village that once existed, where each generation was haunted by a woman without a shadow. Anyone who married her would lose their soul, be imprisoned in the mirror, and their real body would be nothing more than an empty shell. I turned to the last page. The hastily scribbled words appeared. If you want to escape, you have to end the loop. But those who dare will have to face the most terrifying truth. I closed the notebook, cold sweat running down my spine. I knew, to escape, I had to face Emily directly. But how to face her when she was not human, but an entity that stepped out of the darkness, from a centuries-old curse? Suddenly, the sound of heavy rain echoed outside the roof. The rain sounds pounded down like drums. The wind blew hard. The windows shook violently. The house seemed about to collapse. I looked back at the paintings. Each pair of eyes in them seemed to come to life, following me. I panicked and rushed towards the main door, banging hard, but it was still tightly closed. I turned the doorknob until my hand was numb, hopeless. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me. Slowly, clearly, I turned around. My heart stopped beating. For a moment, Emily stood there. Wet black hair, soaked white dress, sunken eyes, and as always, no shadow under her feet. She moved closer, each step making the wooden floor creak. I backed away, my back hitting the door. There was no escape. Emily reached out to me, her thin hand trembling as if inviting me. In that moment, I looked over at the mirror beside me. In the mirror, I saw myself standing still, my eyes empty, while Emily in the mirror smiled happily. I screamed, trying to break the mirror. The glass shattered, but instead of falling to the floor, they floated in the air, reflecting thousands of images of Emily laughing. I trembled, feeling like my mind was about to shatter. Emily took another step, her whisper echoing in my head, unable to escape, never to escape. I fell to my knees, my hands covering my head, the sound of rain, wind, laughter merging into a terrifying song. And then, everything went silent. I looked up. The house was empty. Emily was gone. Only me and the paintings stared at my heart. I knew this was not the end. The real ending was still waiting ahead, where I was forced to face the most cruel truth. Stay tuned for the next episode too. See what I will find out behind that terrible curse. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, when I woke up, I found myself lying on the cold ground of the wooden house. The broken pieces of mirror were still floating in the air, gradually falling down, turning into white dust, drifting in the darkness. Emily was no longer there, but I knew she had never really disappeared. I stood up, my head spinning, my heart pounding. Everything around me seemed to be breathing. The walls groaned. The ceiling shook with each beat of my heart. I rushed to the door. This time, the door opened easily. But what awaited me outside was not the rainy night forest, but an endless space. Before my eyes, a long stone path led to an ancient temple. The stone pillars were carved with strange characters, each letter trembling as if it was wriggling. I walked, each step echoing dozens of times. The sky was dark. There was no moon. Only a thick fog covered it. As I approached the temple, I could clearly hear whispers coming from inside. The sound was not one person, but hundreds, thousands of voices calling my name, drowning me in dizziness. The temple door opened. It was dark inside, but I still walked in as if hypnotized. In the middle of the main room, a giant mirror stood upright. The mirror surface was opaque, reflecting nothing but deep darkness. I trembled as I approached, my intuition telling me that this was the source of all curses. When I raised my hand to lightly touch the mirror surface, it suddenly lit up, and countless images appeared. I saw men in ancient costumes, one by one, being sucked into the mirror, screaming in vain. Next, I saw a woman with a pale face, dark eyes, and long, flowing hair. Without anyone saying anything, I knew that this was the prototype of Emily, the source of darkness. She approached the mirror surface, and strangely, the image looked straight at me, as if it could penetrate the boundaries of time. The voice echoed in my head, low and dark. "You're next." I jerked back, but my legs felt heavy, unable to move. The mirror glowed fiercely, the temple shook, and a cold wind blew. Invisible hands reached out from the mirror, trying to pull me in. I screamed, struggling, but the more I struggled, the tighter they held me in desperation. I remembered the notebook in the wooden house, the last note about ending the loop. I gathered all my strength, pulled the dagger I had brought from my pocket, and stabbed it into the stone floor. A blinding light erupted, the hands disappeared, the temple shook violently, and then fell silent. I collapsed, panting, drenched in sweat, but when I looked up, I was no longer in the temple. I was in my own house, sitting in the middle of the living room. Outside, the rain was pattering. The rain sounds echoed everywhere. The clock on the wall ticked, indicating midnight. I realized with a start that it could all be an illusion or a trip into the subconscious. But the familiar house was now unfamiliar. The frames on the wall were distorted, the wooden floor was cold, and most of all, Emily was sitting right across the chair. She was wearing an old white dress. Her hair was wet and sticky. Her eyes were dark. On her lips was a familiar, endless smile. I looked down at the floor. As always, there was no shadow at her feet. Emily stood up, walking slowly towards me. "You've gone too far," she whispered. Her voice echoed throughout the room, not just from her mouth, but from all four walls. From the mirror, from my own head. I stepped back, my heart about to burst. The house shook, darkness enveloped, leaving only Emily and I standing face to face. I understood that all roads led me back here, directly to her. There was nowhere to run, no forest or temple. All that remained was this house, where the curse had trapped me. In that moment, I wondered if I had the courage to end the cycle. I knew the price would be terrible, but if I didn't, I would forever be a trapped soul, an invisible shadow in the mirrors. And Emily, or the entity that took the form of that woman, would continue to seek out other victims, spreading terror until the end. I clenched my fists, trying to regain my composure. But Emily's eyes kept digging, pulling me into the abyss. Space seemed to be torn apart. Hundreds of images of my face appeared around the room, all screaming silently. I stood in the middle of the nightmare, knowing that the final choice was approaching. Watch the next episode to see what I decided. When I faced Emily face to face in this cursed house. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Emily stepped closer, her deep eyes staring at me as if to suck my soul. The air in the room became thick, hard to breathe. The smell of mold and coldness spread. I backed up against the wall, my back against the cold wood. There was no way out. I could hear my heart beating clearly, each beat resounding amid the rain outside the porch. The rain sounds hit the window like an urge, like a clock counting down to the last moment. Emily stopped right in front of me, her cold hand on my shoulder. In that moment, the image before my eyes seemed to be torn apart, and I found myself standing in the middle of an endless hallway. The hallway was dark, mirrors hung on both sides. I turned my head to look, but each mirror reflected a different version of me. In one mirror, I saw myself with white eyes. In another mirror, I saw myself screaming, my hands pounding the surface like a prisoner. And in all the mirrors, behind me, Emily stood, her cold smile unending. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. Only the sound of footsteps echoed, not mine, but someone else walking parallel. I tried to run, but the hallway had no end. The more I ran, the more tired I became, but the mirrors kept appearing. Each one shattered, shards of glass flying, reflecting distorted images of me and Emily. In the midst of the chaos, I heard a whisper. That whisper repeated the two words, "Home Alone," echoing in my head like a cursed mantra. I realized I was trapped in a maze of mirrors, where everything was built to erode my will and push me over the edge. Suddenly, a light flashed at the end of the hallway. I rushed towards it like a drowning man clutching at a stake. As I approached, I saw an old wooden door, carved with strange symbols. I pushed hard. The door opened, revealing an empty room. In the middle of the room was a wooden chair, on which was a thick diary. I picked it up, dust flying everywhere. Inside, each page recorded the stories of men who had fallen into the same tragedy as me. They all married a woman without a shadow. At first it was love, then fear, and finally they disappeared, leaving only their souls trapped in the mirror. The last page said that whoever had the courage to destroy the original mirror would end the loop. But at the same time, they would have to pay with their own existence. I collapsed, feeling despair enveloping me. I understood that I could not live and escape Emily at the same time. I only had two choices: either accept having my soul drained, or sacrifice myself to end the curse. While I was still hesitating, the door behind me slammed shut. I looked up, saw Emily standing there, approaching, her ghostly smile spreading. The room shook, the mirror shattered, thousands of pieces of glass flying around me. Each piece reflected my withering image, my skin ashen, my eyes empty. I screamed, grabbed the diary, and threw it at the largest mirror. A bright light erupted, causing me to fall. In that light, I saw Emily screaming, her face twisted into hundreds of different shapes. But that scream quickly turned into a demonic laughter, echoing endlessly. When the light went out, I found myself back in the real house. I sat in the middle of the living room, still clutching the torn piece of paper from the diary. Emily sat opposite, still smiling, still with those eyes, and still no shadow. All my efforts only made the loop tighter. I realized that every path I took, every room I opened, every mirror I broke, only led me back to the starting point. I was the one tied to this endless game. The room was cold. The sound of rain outside pounded against each wall. I looked up at the wall clock. The hands pointed to exactly 3 a.m. At that moment, Emily whispered in my ear, her voice echoing throughout the house. "You will never escape." I trembled, but a spark of determination burned inside me. If I could not escape, I would fight to the end. I knew that the next episode would be the moment when I was forced to make a life or death decision. Stay tuned to see what I did when the final choice gradually appeared. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the sound of the clock striking 3 a.m. echoed like a hammer blow straight into my mind. I sat motionless on the living room chair, cold sweat running down, eyes glued to Emily sitting opposite. She remained motionless, her dark eyes staring at me without leaving, a smile etched deep on her pale face. I clearly felt that every breath, every heartbeat of mine was under her control. The darkness in the room was thick, distorting everything, only the sound of rain falling outside. The rain sounds mixed with the pounding heartbeat, creating a creepy song that pulled me to the brink. I tried to close my eyes, telling myself that it was all an illusion. But when I opened my eyes, the scene had changed. I was no longer in the living room, but standing in the middle of an old cemetery. The sky was dark. Thick fog covered everything. Each tombstone rose up like a silent figure. I walked, my legs trembling, my hands cold. Every step I took, I heard the sound of dry leaves falling under my feet, the rustling echoing, but when I stopped, the sound continued. I knew for sure that I was not alone. In the middle of the cemetery, there was a much larger grave. On the old, faded tombstone, I saw my name engraved. My heart stopped beating. I knelt down, trying to read it carefully, but before I could do anything, a cold hand was placed on my shoulder. I turned round. Emily was standing there, her white dress fluttering in the wind, her hair wet as if she had just stepped out of the ground. Below her, once again, there was no shadow. Behind her, shadows gradually appeared, countless blurry shapes, distorted faces, empty eyes. I realized that they were souls trapped in the mirror. They whispered softly, calling my name, repeating it like a refrain. I ran out of the cemetery in a panic, into the mist, running and running, until I realized I was in the middle of a dark forest. The ancient trees stretched tall, their branches intertwined like a prison. The space was dead silent. Only the sound of my heartbeat and rapid breathing could be heard. I groped my way forward and suddenly saw a flickering light in the distance. I approached, realizing it was a half-burnt campfire, a sign of an abandoned camping trip. It was empty, no one around, only a tattered tent being blown by the wind. I stepped into the tent and saw another notebook lying on the ground. The crumpled page had been hastily written in shaky handwriting. Don't trust your eyes. Don't look in the mirror. If you want to survive, find a way to break the silence with your own fear. I muttered those words, feeling like someone from the past was sending me a warning. But before I could understand, a soft laugh came from behind me. I turned around and saw Emily standing by the fire, her eyes shining with a ghostly light. The fire flared up fiercely, illuminating her pale, lifeless face. The forest around me suddenly changed. The tree trunks began to shake. Leaves fell in a rush. The wind howled like 1,000 souls, crying. Emily moved closer, each step making the ground shake. I grabbed the half-burnt branch, holding it out like a weapon. But Emily didn't stop. When we were only a few steps away, I closed my eyes and swung it. The wind howled, the fire died out, and when I opened my eyes, everything was gone. I was back in the living room of the house, sweat pouring down my forehead, my heart pounding wildly. I realized I could no longer distinguish between reality and illusion. Every time Emily touched my hand, every time she looked straight at me, I was pulled into another world, where all my nightmares mixed together with no way out. I remembered the notebook in the shack. Break the silence with your own fear. I wonder, should I face my deepest fear head on instead of running away? Emily still sat there, her smile unchanged. I slowly approached, my eyes never leaving her. I knew the real confrontation had come. No more running away, no more calling for help. It was just me and the entity in the form of this woman. And if I did nothing, I would disappear forever like the others before me. Stay tuned for the next episode to see how I faced my ultimate fear in the final battle with Emily. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. The living room was dark, only the flickering light from the ceiling lamp flickering on Emily's face. She sat there, motionless, her endless smile etched into the space. I stood opposite, my heart pounding, the words from the notebook echoing in my head. Break the silence with your own fear. I realized that running away was no longer an option. I had to open my own way out, no matter how terrible the price. I took a deep breath, deciding to speak. My voice was shaky, but loud enough to fill the room. I admitted everything I feared, from the nights home alone in my childhood, where the darkness in the old house used to make me scream, to the recurring nightmares with the shadowless woman. I said each word, each memory out loud, as if bearing my soul. As I spoke, the four walls seemed to shake. The house let out a groan. Emily tilted her head, her deep black eyes flashing with a strange light, the smile on her lips even wider. Suddenly, the mirrors all over the house cracked, emitting ear-piercing, cracking sounds. From within the mirrors, dozens of faces appeared, screaming silently, as if long-imprisoned souls had finally been awakened. They looked at me, no longer resentful, but as if sending hope. I trembled, understanding that the truth I had just admitted had awakened something hidden deep within this haunted house. But immediately, Emily stood up. The entire room was dark. Only her eyes were shining in the darkness, like two deep holes. She rushed towards me, so fast that the naked eye could hardly keep up. I dodged to the side, my heart almost stopping. Emily's laughter echoed, shrill, wailing like the wind howling in the middle of a stormy night. I grabbed the half-burnt candle on the table, the small flame trembling in my hand. I pointed it at Emily, but she did not retreat. Instead, she moved closer, the darkness thick as if swallowing the fire. In a moment of despair, I screamed everything. I had never dared to admit that I was afraid of myself, afraid of weakness, afraid that one day I would lose my soul completely. My scream echoed, stronger than any sound before. The house shook violently. The wind howled through every crack. In the door, the souls in the mirrors spoke in unison, forming a creepy but strangely powerful harmony. Emily paused, her eyes flashing with anger. She raised her hand. The room suddenly distorted. The ceiling cracked. The wooden floor twisted. I found myself falling into an endless space, as dark as an abyss. In that darkness, I stood in a circle of broken mirrors, spinning around me. In each mirror fragment, my image appeared in hundreds of different forms, some crying, some panicking, some desperate. But in the center, there was another image, me, calm, eyes fixed. I knew that this was the real me, the part that Emily could not reach. I rushed towards the mirror, clenched my fists, and screamed again. The mirror glowed, dispelling some of the darkness. Emily screamed, her voice mixing with the sound of the rain outside, the rain sounds echoing like whips on flesh. She rushed forward, but this time I did not retreat. I raised the candle high. The flame suddenly flared up, clearly illuminating her pale face and empty eyes. The fire reflected throughout the room, causing the spirits in the mirror to reach out in unison, as if to help me. The chaos lasted for who knows how long. I collapsed, exhausted, breathing heavily. When I opened my eyes, I found myself back in the living room. Emily was gone. The mirrors were completely shattered, leaving only the bare wooden frames. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the house was silent. I stood up shakily, trying to believe that it was all over. But from the corner of the room, a soft laugh rang out, a reminder that this was only the beginning of the nightmare. Stay tuned for the next episode to find out what really happened behind the seemingly broken curtain of silence. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, after a soft laugh echoed in the corner of the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned my head slowly, trying not to show my panic. The room was dark. The broken mirrors were still there, casting distorted streaks of light from the flickering yellow light. The laughter was not loud, but it crept into every crack, as if crawling straight into my chest, making my heart tighten. I picked up the remaining candle, holding it high to illuminate it, but the weak, trembling flame could not dispel the darkness. From the corner of the room, a figure stepped out. It was not Emily, but me. The face was identical, the gait was identical, but the eyes were empty, and on the lips was a smile so long that it was distorted. I stepped back, my heart pounding, feeling like I was being engulfed in a vivid creepypasta nightmare. The figure approached, each heavy step dragging across the wooden floor. I screamed, but the sound that came out was only a hoarse sound stuck in my throat. The shadow stopped right in front of me, then whispered in my own voice, "You can never escape because you are me." In that moment, all the broken mirrors lit up at the same time, reflecting dozens of images of me standing next to Emily. I knelt down. I was pulled into the darkness. I was stunned, falling to the cold floor. When I looked up, the whole room disappeared, leaving only me standing in a pitch-black space. In the distance, I saw a small door, a faint light shining through the crack. I walked, my legs felt heavy, but my heart urged me to go there. When I opened the door, I entered a strangely familiar room. It was my childhood room, where I had to spend long nights home alone. The room was small. The lonely moonlight shone through the old window. Thick darkness covered every corner. I saw the old wooden bed, the study table with peeling paint drawers. Everything intact as in my memory. But that space did not bring a sense of safety. On the contrary, it made me tremble, because I knew this was where the fear began. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind me. I turned around. Emily was standing there, her white dress covered in mud, her eyes deep, her smile never fading. There was no shadow under her feet, as usual. But this time, it was not just Emily, but countless other figures gradually appeared. In the room, other versions of me, with distorted faces, some crying, some laughing madly, some silent with white eyes, all stood around me, surrounding me tightly, whispering the same sentence: "This is where you belong." I was pushed into a corner, my heart pounding, sweat pouring down. I remembered the warning: face your deepest fear. My fear is the past, the long nights in this room, when the wind blows through the cracks of the door, the gentle knocking on the window frame, the sound of rain falling on the porch lasts forever. The rain sounds echo from afar, like a deathly song, reminding me of buried memories. I scream, this time not out of fear, but out of determination. I admit it all, admit that. This fear has followed me since I was little, has haunted me until now. I no longer run away. That scream echoes, shattering the space. The figures around me all disappear. Only Emily is still standing there, her eyes flashing with anger. The room shakes violently, the walls crack, the ceiling collapses. I rush towards the window, trying to open it, but it is locked. Emily approaches. Her hand reaches out, her voice echoes, "You have reached your limit." In that moment, I see the small mirror placed on the study table. I knew this was the original mirror, the source of the loop. I rushed forward, picked up the stone, and smashed it against the mirror. There was a deafening explosion, a burst of light, blowing everything apart. I was knocked down, my head hitting the floor, and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in the middle of an empty room. No Emily, no other person. But I didn't dare believe that I had escaped, because in the silence, I heard a soft whisper close to my ear: "You've only just begun." Watch the next episode to find out what happens after I smash that fateful mirror. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I lay still. On the floor of the empty room, breathing raggedly, my body heavy as if someone was pressing down on me. The broken pieces of mirror around me glowed dimly, casting a pale blue light on the ceiling. I wondered if breaking the mirror would really end the loop or just open another, more terrifying door. Everything was eerily silent. Even the sound of rain that always clung to the house had disappeared. The silence was not peaceful, but a deathly silence, like the calm before a real storm. I tried to sit up, but my mind was spinning, my vision blurred. Suddenly, a light knock sounded. Not from the door, not from the wall, but from deep inside my body. I held my chest, my heart pounding violently, each beat like a knock for help. I staggered to my feet, looking around the room. In the middle, where the mirror had been, there was now a small wooden door, engraved with symbols I had never seen before. It was slightly open, a red light shining out, and a murmuring sound rang out like 1,000 voices combined. I stepped forward, my hands shaking as I pushed the door open. Behind the door was a dark cellar, a staircase leading down to the depths. I slowly walked down, step by step, my heart heavy. The air below was thick, The musty and fishy smell made me suffocate. When I got there, I found myself standing in the middle of a giant cellar. The walls were hung with cracked mirrors, and in each mirror I saw familiar faces. They were my previous husbands, those who had fallen into the same cycle as me. They screamed silently, their eyes desperately begging for release. In the middle of the cellar, Emily stood there. Her white dress had turned a dull grey, her hair falling down to cover half her face. She was no longer smiling, her dark eyes staring straight at me. "You think you can escape me?" Her voice echoed from everywhere, from the mirror, from the wall, from inside my head. I trembled, but tried to stay calm. I replied that I was no longer afraid, that I had seen the truth, and if the price for ending it all was my existence, I was ready. Emily tilted her head slightly, her crooked smile slowly returning. She raised her hand, and the entire cellar shook. The mirrors shattered, white light bursting out, shining straight at me. I screamed, my whole body aching, like hundreds of shards of glass piercing my flesh. But at the same time, I saw the other souls begin to dissolve, their faces softening, their eyes glowing before they dissolved into the light. They were freed. Emily screamed, her voice echoing through the space, filled with anger. She lunged forward, her cold hand grabbing my shoulder. I felt my soul being pulled, about to be sucked into nothingness. But I clenched my hand, remembering the words in the notebook, "Break the silence with your fear." I screamed one last time, gathering all my strength, admitting that the real fear was not Emily, but myself, the weak person who always ran away. I faced myself. At that moment, the red light in the basement suddenly went out, replaced by a pure white light that filled the room. Emily disappeared, turned into ashes, blended into the air. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, tears welling up in my eyes, not knowing whether it was from pain or relief. The basement shook one last time, then collapsed. I woke up, finding myself in the middle of the familiar living room. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first rays of dawn shone through the window, illuminating the entire house. I sat up, my heart empty. No more Emily, no more mirror, no more whispers. But I knew, even though I had escaped a curse, a part of my soul had been taken away. Those memories would haunt me until I closed my eyes. I stepped out the door into the bright morning light. But my shadow stretched out on the ground was shaky and distorted. I suddenly realized that perhaps the loop never really ended, and perhaps one night, when the rain falls and the darkness returns, I will hear the whisper of my name again. Stay tuned for the next episode to find out if this nightmare really ends, or if it is just the beginning of a new loop.